Like in many things in life, it was all a little bit serendipitous or haphazard. I became a lawyer because it seemed like the thing to do, having read law, and I did enjoy practicing law, but I always really knew I wanted to do something in investment and finance.
I was lucky enough to get an interview those days at Barclays Capital, BZW was calling those days, and I was taken on. My job description was basically non-existent. I was assistant, to whom and to what it wasn't specified, and I took it from there. Writing is the best idea to make sure that your thoughts are clear.
And I started off wanting to write the sort of blueprint for risk analysts, not risk managers, risk analysts, people whose job it is to assess the risk and also to understand the sort of models that traders use for pricing and hedging.
In order to be able to write a book that is able to be understood by people who have no knowledge of the subject at all, you have to go really deep and find the simplest ways of expressing concepts.
The moment you put pen to paper, you're forced to be clear, you're forced to say, do I really mean this? And when you see it stark black on white, it faces you and it forces you to think.
It's really important that regulators have people that really understand the models that banks are using.
I think one of the problems has been that government's instinct whenever anything goes wrong is to regulate. And part of the problem there is they very rarely understand anything about what they're regulating.
Politicians all over the world are trying, they're experimenting. They're taking instruments out of their toolkits that they never thought they would be using.
A young analyst will go and work for a regulator just as a stepping stone before he can get a job in a bank, because the money's better in banks. And that needs to change. We need to pay the regulators better than we pay the equivalent positions in banks so that you get the better people there.
I would actually go back a long way. I would go back to the reign of Edward III, and I would single out the collapse of the Bardi Italian banking house in Florence.
Probably the Black-Scholes paper. The Black-Scholes paper put derivatives on a firm theoretical and practical footing.
A very important event was the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Agreement in 1999 because it allowed retail banks to operate in capital markets too. So banks were investing in these toxic products with their savers' money.
What basically happened was that Edward III borrowed huge amounts of money to pursue the 100 Years' War. And in the early parts of that war, he was very unsuccessful because he paid other people lots of money to do his fighting for him. And they rather predictably took his money and stayed at home. And I think it should have taught people two things. It should have taught people, firstly, that credit is what you give people who can't actually pay their debts. And the second thing it should have taught people is that credit is not inexhaustible.
I've always believed that checks and balances, which comes back to a whole series of reconciliations actually on a daily basis within the world of securities operations, is absolutely essential. And to be honest, I have come across companies where in my role as, let's say, an analyst or a trainer, we've got into discussions about what that firm currently does, and I've been amazed to find that very often they don't do things on a daily basis, they might do things on a monthly or on a quarterly basis, which to me is the thought of what could go wrong within a month or within a quarter is horrendous when you take account of the value of the assets that people are handling now.
There's actually very little that's happened over the last couple of years that can be explained in terms of conventional finance theory. And that's frightening, but at the same time it's quite challenging.
Birth of new ideas and new ways of doing things always come out of crisis.
And to give you an analogy, if we were talking about physics rather than finance, we really would be sitting here saying, hey, you know, Einstein actually got it wrong. Everything we thought we understood about physics was false. And we have to find a new way of moving forward. And that may seem a rather extreme way of putting it, but I think that's what we face with finance.